The Shenandoah Trail Murders. Spring had wrapped the Shenandoah National Park in a blanket of color and calm. The trees stood tall, dressed in fresh green, while wildflowers dotted the trails like silent witnesses to the season's gentle arrival. The forest felt alive, not just with movement, but with promise. A promise of warmth, rebirth, and serenity. It was here, in this seemingly enchanted wilderness, that Lolly Winans and Julianne Williams set up camp. Two adventurous spirits, deeply connected to nature and to each other, had planned a peaceful retreat away from the noise of the world. Their tent was pitched beside a cascading waterfall, the kind of place that looks like it belongs in a painting. They laughed, explored, snapped photos. Every breeze through the trees seemed to carry their happiness forward. But then, the silence changed. It was no longer comforting. It was unnatural. Days passed, and the rhythm of the trail shifted. Rangers stumbled upon something that chilled them, a campsite left as if untouched, but with something deeply wrong inside. The tent stood upright. Their belongings were neatly placed. But inside, an unspeakable scene had unfolded. The women had been harmed in a way that suggested something disturbingly personal. Their lives had been stolen in the heart of nature, in the very place they felt most safe. There were no signs of struggle around the tent. No footprints, no broken branches, no cries heard, just a void. Spring still bloomed all around, but in that pocket of the forest, something had curdled in the air, and the scent of new beginnings gave way to something heavier. The kind of silence that doesn't bring peace but dread. The FBI took over almost immediately. From the beginning, the case felt different, not just because of the location or the victims, but because of what wasn't there. No signs of a struggle. No forced entry into the tent, no tracks leading away through the underbrush. It was as if whoever had done it had appeared from the forest itself and vanished back into it like mist. The investigation stretched for years. At one point, authorities arrested a man with a troubling past and possible links to the area. But the evidence wasn't enough. No confession, no definitive match. He walked free. And with that, the mystery only deepened. Lolly and Julianne's story faded from headlines, but not from memory. To this day, the trail where they camped remains open. Hikers still wander through, unaware of what happened just off the path. But those who do know say the atmosphere changes the moment you step near the site. There's a weight to the air, like the forest is holding its breath. Time seems to slow. The chirping of birds falls away, even on the brightest spring afternoons, and shadows seem to linger longer than they should. Some rangers avoid the area entirely once the sun starts dipping. They've heard the stories, quiet footsteps on gravel when no one's there, a strange hush that settles suddenly, like the woods are watching. Some say it's the place remembering. Others believe it's waiting for someone to return, or for someone who never truly left. The girl in the well. Japan's spring in Saitama, Japan, had just begun to bloom. Cherry blossoms painted the city in soft pinks and whites, and the air was thick with the scent of renewal. But on the outskirts of town, in a neighborhood where silence clung to the walls of empty houses, something far less delicate was stirring. Complaints began to surface, a foul, lingering odor rising from an old, unused well behind an abandoned property. At first, locals thought it might be a decaying animal, but when curious neighbors ventured closer, they described an immediate wave of nausea, dizziness, and something harder to explain. The feeling of being watched. Not from behind a window or a bush, but from below. The police were eventually called, and when they opened the well, the truth hit them harder than the smell ever could. Inside, wrapped in moldy, torn cloth and barely recognizable, was the body of Ayako, a high school girl reported missing months earlier. Her case had gone cold, forgotten by all except her grieving parents. She hadn't simply vanished. She had been taken, held, and discarded like trash. Evidence suggested she had been alive when she was thrown down the narrow shaft, trapped in darkness, calling out to a world too busy to hear her. And while springed above, Ayako died alone, with only damp walls and silence to answer her cries. It wasn't just the smell that haunted the well, it was the echo of everything that had gone unheard. As investigators delved deeper, the horror behind Ayako's disappearance began to take shape. The trail led not to some distant stranger, but to the very halls of her own school, a place that should have offered safety. Ayako had been relentlessly bullied by 3 classmates, girls who wore the same uniform, smiled in the same yearbook, and passed her in the hallways daily with empty eyes. One day, under the guise of making peace, they lured her to the abandoned house on the city's edge. There, the truth unfolded in silence. They beat her without mercy, mocked her cries, and when they grew bored, dragged her limp body to the well. She was still breathing, still aware. They tossed her down like refuse, out of sight, out of mind. When questioned, they laughed, called it a prank, a joke that got out of hand. They showed no remorse, only irritation that they'd been caught. The arrests came swiftly, but the damage had already been done. And something about that place, about that well, never seemed to settle again. Starting the following spring, strange reports surfaced. At night, between March and April, faint sounds would rise from the well. Not wind, not pipes, but words. Muffled, repetitive. Locals swore they heard "Tasukede," help me, a pleading voice caught in an endless loop. Even more disturbing were the sightings. A motionless figure in a school uniform, always standing near the well after sunset. She didn't move. She didn't speak. But those who looked her way were met with hollow eyes staring back. Not angry, not afraid, just empty, as if waiting for someone to see her, as if she never left. And perhaps, in the heavy breath of spring air, in the hush of blooming trees, Ayako's voice still clings to the well's damp stone, begging not to be forgotten. The greenhouse mother, California spring, had arrived in the Sonoma Valley with cinematic beauty. Rolling hills turned emerald, wildflowers emerged from the earth like secrets reborn, and the air carried the scent of fresh beginnings. It was in this postcard-perfect setting that a young couple, full of hope and ambition, purchased a sprawling piece of land to build the vineyard they had always dreamed of. The property felt untouched, serene, almost suspended in time. But at its edge, half consumed by ivy and decades of silence, stood a derelict glass greenhouse. It wasn't mentioned in the sale, had no entry in the documents. Just a forgotten structure nestled in overgrowth, like the earth had tried to erase it. When they stepped inside, the light hit fractured glass panels, casting warped reflections. That's when they noticed the items. A one-eyed doll lying in the dirt, crumpled children's drawings faded with time, and a rocking chair so small it could only belong to a toddler, one that moved, ever so slightly, even with no breeze to explain it. At first, it was easy to chalk it up to neglect, just leftover clutter from a previous owner. But the deeper they dug, both literally and figuratively, the darker the story beneath the soil became. While clearing the rotted floorboards, a patch of earth shifted, revealing something beneath. The dirt was shallow, disturbed, and then, bone. Not one, but 3 fragile skeletons, curled unnaturally close together as if trying to hold on to something. The authorities confirmed the worst. They were children, left there decades ago. No official records, no missing persons reports that matched. Just silence. What was meant to be a place of life, of cultivation, had harbored death. And from that moment forward, nothing about the land or the air that surrounded the greenhouse ever felt clean again. The garden they'd bought wasn't forgotten. It had been buried, waiting for someone to listen. Forensic analysis placed the children's remains somewhere between the late 1970s and early 1980s. No reports matched, no names, no missing posters. It was as if Matthew, Lila, and Henry, the names later heard whispered across the property, had never existed at all. That silence was more chilling than any evidence, and it was that silence that seemed to cling to the house like a second skin. Within weeks of the discovery, the couple who had once dreamed of cultivating a vineyard now refused to sleep under its roof. They spoke of distant laughter echoing through the vines at night, of the gentle creak of the rocking chair in the greenhouse, even after they'd chained the door shut. Most disturbing of all was the recurring apparition, a woman in white, barefoot, her dress dragging softly across the soil, her hair obscuring her face. She moved slowly among the rows of grapevines, always murmuring the same 3 names in a voice barely audible over the wind: Matthew, Lila, Henry. It wasn't just imagination. Security cameras, installed out of desperation, captured a figure matching the description, pale, blurred, gliding, for only a few seconds before vanishing as if dissolved by the air. Experts offered no explanation. Paranormal investigators who visited the site refused to return. The greenhouse was eventually sealed with heavy iron chains, locked tight by those who believed it would trap whatever remained inside. But the land remembers. Every spring, while the rest of the valley bursts into color, the vines around that one greenhouse shrivel and die, as if mourning, as if touched by something colder than winter. Locals still speak in hushed tones about the greenhouse mother, a presence waiting among the roots, not for revenge, but for someone to speak the truth, for someone to say they're sorry. Until then, she walks, and the earth beneath her feet refuses to bloom.